This strategic dialogue examines how cloud platforms have become the invisible backbone of the global economy. Recent outages have revealed just how fragile and concentrated this digital infrastructure has become. In this upcoming chat, Naval Kush, a seasoned cloud governance manager at Amdocs, will unpack the systemic risks, accountability gaps, and governance challenges that arise when critical services depend on a small number of powerful cloud providers. Before we introduce our guest speaker, Rohana will outline some housekeeping rules for this session. Hi, Rohana.
Welcome, everyone, and hi, Priya. Before we dive in, let me quickly run through some Zoom tips to help us have a great session together. This will be a 45-minute discussion. There will be 12 to 15 minutes allotted for our guest speaker. The last 15 minutes are allocated to the audience for their questions. Please be aware that this session is being recorded, and by participating, you consent to being recorded. All attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. Only the speakers and the host will have their video on. Attendees can keep their video off or on. Please use the chat box to submit questions. We will address them during the Q&A session at the end. We recommend using Speaker View for the best experience. This recording will be submitted to various social media outlets. It will be free of charge and for educational purposes only.
Thank you, Rahana. And now I'm very delighted to introduce our speaker for today. Naval Kush is a seasoned cloud governance manager at Amdocs. He's also recognized as a top voice on LinkedIn and is widely known for his thought leadership across multi-cloud governance, FinOps, and IT service excellence. He is a passionate public speaker and community builder, frequently sharing insights that help organizations modernize cloud operations and drive responsible, scalable tech transformation. Welcome, Neville.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Rohan. It's a great opportunity for me and to share my views, and I hope the audience will get a lot of insights into the topic that we have for today, which is public cloud dependency and related vulnerabilities. All right, so just allow me a minute so I start sharing my screen. Even though I would like to keep this session more engaging and interactive, but I do have some slides that I think should be relevant to the topic and contain a lot of statistics. All right, I hope you guys can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
You can? All right, that's great. Okay, so as we discussed and as we introduced, the topic for today is public cloud dependency of the enterprises and how global issues and resilience problems do impact these organizations and enterprises globally. So let's explore the agenda for today that we have is we are going to see and do a quick recap on the recent outages that we saw on three major hyperscalers and the impact these kind of incidents had on the global resilience. We will see the structural weaknesses that we have in the cloud ecosystem within enterprises and within the entire ecosystem as well. We will explore the transparency and accountability gaps between different departments and functions and groups. We will explore how to determine and how to strategize well-defined and resilient futuristic cloud strategy, cloud adoption, and operations both. We will see a few quick bites on cloud governance, observability, and policies, and then we will have a quick open Q&A session as well. All right, so let's begin. The first thing that I usually like to start with numbers. So here are a few numbers. Uh, we saw that recently in the last year, we saw AWS having a global outage that impacted a lot of big platforms and applications worldwide. Even though the major impact of this was in North America and Europe. So now we saw that if you see on the left-hand side, we have major apps like Snapchat, AWS, Roblox, Reddit, Ring, Fortnite, the game, and Canva. they all saw a major issue due to the cloud vendors platform being down, and Down Detector and the other users in the region repeatedly reported it. And we saw the kind of impact that it could do, but it was just a start, right? So later on, about in the next month, we saw, um, particularly in November, we saw that Cloudflare had a similar kind of issue. But of course, it was now just not continental, it was worldwide. So we saw reports from coming in starting from beginning from the USA and the UK, and later on it spanned all across Asia Pacific and other continents as well. So as you can notice, due to the Cloudflare outage, we saw Twitter being down, we saw Spotify having issues, OpenAI had a lot of problems, and usually we all know what happens. So a lot of websites were showing the internal server error, and it was because of an underlying DNS problem. So these are the two major outages that we're discussing, but of course there were more. These are the biggest one that we have to talk today. Let's see how this all, builds up. First of all, this is a fun architecture that somebody built. I'm not the owner of it, but I'm using it as a representation so that you can see the different dependencies, the systems, how fragile the entire ecosystem is, and how dependencies are actually underlying at the bottom of the things. Just starting from the top, you have all the major apps, you have all the major enterprises and organizations. They're all using different cloud vendors like AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, Oracle Cloud, Alibaba, Tencent. And on the back end, we have Cloudflare, which is the major DNS and other web services provider across the globe. And obviously, AI is kind of scaling everything up. And, we are not in the era where the adoption is slow. The adoption is going up and up at lightning speed. And I would not call that just AI is driving it, but AI is a major driver of this kind of an evolution and scale up. And obviously, we saw the DNS issues, and DNS lies at the bottom of it. And we can also see a fun part here where sharks are cutting undersea cables across the globe. Nobody knows why, but it's happening. So there are a lot of factors which are not known. The longer story short is there are a lot of factors which are not known by everybody, by every organization, every architect, every group. That a small issue can, you know, create a domino effect on a lot of other services in the cloud, right? And that's not mostly under everybody's control. So we can say that these kind of recent outages are not merely technical failures, but they're more systematic resilience failure. One service toppling down the other, and then the whole ecosystem faces lags or gaps or production issues. So every enterprise kind of feels the shock. Okay, so in one way or the other, you could have a dependency on one platform or one app or a single API or a single website or anything else, right? So ultimately, somebody will face the issues. And service availability, as you can see now, is no longer dependent on your infrastructure, whether it is public cloud or private or hybrid. It is now dependent on a shared accountability model that is spanning across different cloud vendors, the consumers, regulators, and architects across this entire ecosystem. So one service impacts all the other services. That's how we are operating in this modern infrastructure. Now, talking about the numbers. Uh, the overall, blogs, website, news portals, they all reported 20% plus global web traffic was impacted due to the recent outages. But I don't believe this is a real number. I think that was much more. It was not 20%, it was close to 30, 40%, maybe 50, who knows. It depends on the geographical locations, but yeah, it was much more than that, much higher than that. How it happened is, and how it actually scaled down different sectors is what I try to represent here. So first of all, finance and banking. We all know that banking hugely depends on cloud services right now because of the scale of the industry that we have globally. So finance and banking sector experienced a lot of transactional delays, payment gateway outages, platform issues, cloud availability or portal availability issues that directly impacted economic stability because nobody was able to do transactions, or even if somebody was able to, they were facing lags. And time is money. Yeah, money is money, but time is also money here. Healthcare systems and hospitals and doctors, they all saw issues with their appointment systems, lags, delayed reporting and diagnostics, due to which customers were complaining. The cloud uptime is now directly tied to these kind of delays. So obviously, if the services are down, there are no reports, the doctors cannot do anything, they're stuck in, and they're just waiting in their clinic like their patients. Now, transportation and logistics again faced similar issues when their apps were down, ticketing was down, fleet management systems saw lags. So we all saw the whole ecosystem of retail also face the impact. And public sector services like identity management platforms, tax portals, emergency systems also had dependency on this kind of architectures. And finally, the long story short here is that public cloud outages that we saw, they're no longer IT incidents for one organization or not even the cloud vendor. They are business continuity and BCM issues. They are disaster recovery issues. And if you don't have that kind of a DR architecture, you are going to face the pain in the production environment, and obviously your customer experience is hampered. So, having a heavy reliance on one vendor or one service is not ideal in today's era. Now, talking more in deep about numbers, we have the statistics for AWS and Cloudflare averages both. I have mentioned the sources below. So now business impact, you can see more than 3,500 companies were impacted worldwide due to the AWS outage. However, not everybody had the same scale of impact, but they had some kind of an impact. Regional impact, more than 60 countries were part of this problem. Service impact was about 30 to 40% of the global AWS workloads due to this outage were impacted. Even if the rest of the services and workloads were working, there were some kind of delays, and we all saw it happen live, right? Incident reports were huge, but if you compare the scale, the whole point of this data is that AWS outage, yes, the numbers look more. But if you just see on the right hand side, the Cloudflare data, right? We the most important number in this table is the service impact. It says that more than 20% of global web traffic was impacted. It means that all the major websites and services and tools and apps that we use every day, even including Twitter, they were down, right? So it was a direct impact on social media availability. You can say the internet was down, right? And this duration of the timeline also matters. If you see AWS outage, it was down for 15 hours, but nobody cried aloud, right? But Cloudflare being down just for 3 to 5 hours, it impacted a lot of services. So you can see, even if it is the smallest block you saw on the figure that I've showed in the second slide, even a small time span of 3 to 5 hours means a lot when it comes to the user base, because the user base is huge. We are talking about, like 3, 4 billion users across the globe. All right, moving from the statistics to the factors that caused it, or you can say how you can dodge or avoid these kind of consequences. So first weakness that I'm going to talk about is over centralization of workloads on a small group of hyperscalers due to their pricing models, commercials, lock-ins, discounts and proprietary services. So what happens is, usually we decide when we are choosing which cloud to use to deploy your workloads, you basically are attracted to one vendor or the other based upon these factors. Either the pricing is cheaper compared to the other, or you have lock-ins, but you have more discounts. And there are some services, or you can say expertise, that each vendor has that makes your decision, more biased toward them. So basically, these are all the factors that could attract you towards having just your entire infrastructure in one vendor. Now, because of these kind of deep dependencies on public cloud services, what's happening is the innovation speed is increasing, because obviously in the cloud, as compared to the physical data centers, now you're getting everything within, just a click. Or you can say you can just simply run a Lambda function, and you can get your entire infrastructure spent up within minutes, which used to happen within weeks or months earlier, right? So this is innovation speed is increased, but portability is decreased, because obviously you're now relying on one vendor, or at max two, right? And exit options in these cloud service providers can be difficult, because obviously there are data transfer charges, network charges, storage charges, everything is chargeable, right? So it's not an easy decision that now you can decide that now, okay, I can shut down whatever infrastructure I have in the data center. It used to be easy. You could have a quicker exit as quicker as 3 months, 4 months, 6 months. But in the cloud, it can take a while, right? Because everything is cost. Unaccounted shared dependencies, as we discussed, like DNS providers, identity platforms, CDNs, edge networks, backbone networks, they cannot create single points of failure when we are depending on one vendor, not multiple clouds. And obviously, resilience design is not part of every cloud migration because when we speak about cloud migrations, most of the organizations, because we all were rushing towards a quicker cloud adoption, we were doing lift and shift. And because of the lift and shifts, these problems arise because we never thought about having a modern disaster recovery architecture. We just did lift and shift. Okay, this is prod, this is UAT, this is my DR architecture. And what happened is we tried to mimic what we used to have in the on-premise, and that doesn't work in the cloud. Even if some organizations thought about having a good DR architecture, everything in cloud is double the price, right? So what happens is a lot of organizations don't choose a higher resilient architecture, and that adds up to being one of the pain points later on. And as I said, vendor dominance is not only market driven, but it is often, and it is, I will say, not often, always architecturally driven or reinforced because uh, one architecture for your product cannot be the same for the other, and obviously you cannot generalize them. So one vendor, the choice of one vendor can be better as compared to the other vendor in this case. So lock-ins are inevitable. So in some cases, not always. So these are some structural weaknesses that we have in the cloud ecosystem. Now, talking about these weaknesses on a higher level. So as I said, just to recap, we have the pricing models that are one of the factors. We have managed services and reduced portability and exit options that leave you in the middle of a desert now. We have architectural convenience. We choose the easiest architecture and not the most resilient one. Ecosystem lock-in because of the proprietary services. And finally, hidden dependencies like DNS and others that you never explore or that you never investigate earlier before choosing a vendor, right? So these are all the high level ones. Now, talking about the transparency and accountability gaps. So first of all, we all know public cloud providers, they all give you a managed cloud service. So the managed infrastructure service, so it could be anything, SaaS, PaaS, IaaS. So now what's happening is they own the entire ecosystem. They own the entire communications that are going to happen, right? You have to rely on them to be able to monitor their cloud infrastructure because it's a shared responsibility. You are responsible for your infrastructure on the cloud, while for the cloud, the vendor is responsible, right? So anything is going down, you will have to rely on them and you don't have a choice, right? You will have to rely on them. Whatever they're saying is true or false, but it's evident, right? So they're largely controlled by the CSPs. Now you receive high level status updates, but you don't receive any actionable technical insights because that infrastructure is out of your control. So if there's a technical outage on their end, you cannot do anything. Just have to wait for minutes, for hours, sometimes for days, and you have to wait for a high level root cause analysis and then a remediation. Now, the next one is there is no standardized global framework for that encompasses all the cloud vendors, right? So each cloud vendor have their own policies. Even though you get discounts, you can get credits when a service is down. They obviously have SLAs and OLAs that are available within their ecosystem, but the standardization is not as per the industry. Every vendor has their own definitions, and in some cases you get discounts, in some cases you get credits, in some cases you don't get anything, right? Or things get adjusted in your final invoices. Then finally, to summarize all this discussion, trust requires visibility, and even if you're a mature organization and you trust your vendor, this trust doesn't work in the modern era, right? Because if something is down, you can just explain to your customers that the cloud vendor services are down, but actually you have a business impact. So even if you have a lot of complex monitoring systems and alerting systems, they will fail to predict anything that's going to happen on the underlying architectures within the CSP systems or within the vendor system. Now coming to the solution. When we discussed the topic of future ready and resilient cloud adoption strategies, how to go forward with that, and even if we had made mistakes in the past, how to correct them. So first tip that I have for everybody is we should all think about operating hybrid, or basically a mixture of on-premises and hybrid cloud. So you have to move from a single cloud dependency to a resilient hybrid and multi-cloud strategies. And especially if you have any critical workloads, think twice when you are just purely relying on the cloud. You should have a DR architecture, whether it is running on a different cloud vendor or probably on a on-premise physical data center, if possible. For the most critical workloads, you need to think about designing workloads that can operate across on-premise and private cloud and multiple CSPs. Uh, we need to think about vendor agnostic platforms such as Kubernetes, open source softwares, portable solutions, and not just being tied to the lock-ins of the vendors. Now, avoid building business critical systems on deeply proprietary services that don't have an exit plan. You need to think twice when you're signing a contract with the CSPs, or whenever you are procuring a service from the CSPs. You need to just verify that the exit plans, data charges, and basically need to do some kind of a FinOps activity and FinOps analysis on that architecture so that you're not stuck with a wrongful exit plan or a longer exit plan that takes a decade. Then next one is architect for failure, not just for performance. Yes, performance is important, user experience is important, but if it fails, if your system is not working, your product means nothing. So outages will happen in the cloud without a prior notice, and you need to anticipate that. Next one is you need to design your systems to degrade gracefully in case of an outage. When an active architectures across different availability zones or regions in the cloud, if one region is down, you should be able to quickly migrate your active workloads or your live workloads to another region that is working, or to another availability zone in the same region that is working. You need to maintain a proper DR strategy, and you need to regularly test your failovers through chaos engineering and through your proven disaster recovery drills that you can do monthly or quarterly, but that is a necessity in this modern times as it was before. Then you need to strengthen your governance framework. You need to strengthen your risk management profile for your organization and for your cloud architecture. And you need to invest slightly more in observability solutions. So you can predict a trend, or you can predict if something is going wrong when it comes to especially to storage and network, right? To see it more visually, we need to choose hybrid cloud instead of just a single vendor. You need to think twice about the exit plans. You need to do your failover testing. Think more about DR scenarios and DR architecture and more resilient architectures. Regularly test your failover mechanisms so you're safe. Use cloud agnostic platforms. Have graceful degradation. Mostly use automation so that you don't have to do a lot of manual efforts while you're trying to do the failover of your architecture. And finally, governance and observability is the key. Strengthening your needs, investing, and doing a risk management analysis probably every 6 months, if not a quarter, is ideal in the scenario. So with this, I would like to close my slides, and I don't want to show you any data anymore, but the closing notes that I have for you is first thing, I'm not saying that cloud vendors are the platform or the problem, or cloud is not the problem. Blind dependency on one vendor is okay. So you don't need to just trust a single vendor, or you don't need to trust a single SaaS solution. If you have any issues with this, you can fall into trouble. So think about being resilient. Future is not the cloud versus on-prem. This is not the fight or the argument that we are having today. Intelligent hybrid resilience is okay. You need to think about hybrid architectures more. Organizations that design for failure will the longer race. Okay, it's like the story of the rabbit and the tortoise. Because in this case, again, even if you're slow, and in case of failures, you are still resilient and your product is working, you will still have people who are going to buy your product, and you will get good feedback about the experience for that. And finally, resilience now is a leadership responsibility. It is not just a need. It is not just an architecture. It is not just a strategy. Now, leaders need to ensure that they are making sure that their products, their architectures, their organizations, they are well resilient in case of global outages. Not everything is avoidable, but most things are. Okay. All right. So with that, I would like to close the session, close the topic from my side, and now opening the floor for any questions. And you can see my QR code if you're not connected with me on LinkedIn. If you would like to connect, you can scan and connect. And we'll also send it later. You can find me on LinkedIn again.
Thank you so much, Naval. I think the key words that I take away from this wonderful talk is resilience is key. So thank you for all your insights. And this was an absolute masterclass. Now we're going to open the floor for questions from our panelists. For our panelists, and I think let me just start with one question for you, Naval, is which sector do you think is most dangerously unprepared for cloud disruption? Is it finance, healthcare, public services, or transportation?
Well, I think that all the industries, I cannot, put all my money on one industry because as I mentioned, every industry that you mentioned is critical. So if the banking is down, the citizens and the civilians are stuck. They will face issues in their daily life. We are highly dependent on, especially when it comes to the modern day transactions, right? If your phone is not working, if you cannot tap and pay, you cannot even get a coffee, or you can not get an emergency response kit. Now coming to healthcare again, if you're, we all know how the situation is. You have to wait a lot for the doctor's appointment. And once you get a doctor's appointment and their is not working or their software is not working, you can imagine the chaos at the clinic. Somebody waiting for 2 weeks or 1 month for just an appointment, and the doctor is not able to diagnose the issue. So that's failure. That's a shame. Talking about transportation, if transportation is not working, or let's say the freight is not working and you're not able to get the goods from one city to another, again that's a problem because the grocery supply chain is stopped and you cannot do anything about it. Even if there's a delays, there are safety issues, there are regulatory issues, because we just spoke about civilians, we never even spoke about the regulators that we have. So obviously it's not just a bad customer experience, the enterprises can also get fined when they're not able to provide the services properly. So it's both factors. It's also, monetary, and it's also human factor that we are talking about. But yeah, on a higher scale, I would say the banking sector as of today, from my experience, is the heaviest user of the cloud so far. Even though I'm not saying all the other industries are not, but BFSI is the most dependent one on the cloud, and they're multi-cloud. I know different banks are using different vendors. So I think they will face most impact, if you ask me honestly.
Looks like we have a bit of a shy audience. It does happen sometimes. So I'm going to take advantage of this few
Mhm.
minutes and ask you another question if I can. How can international cooperation address such type of cross-border risks which are created by globally intertwined cloud infrastructure?
I think the solution we have here is having your own sovereign clouds, right? And that's the topic that has been in the market. That's a hot topic which has been in the market for like past 2 years now. A
Hmm.
lot of governments have already thought about it, having their own sovereign cloud so that you remove the dependencies. However, you cannot remove completely eradicate dependencies like Cloudflare. That's bound to happen. But at least you can eliminate a lot of risk factors that you still have when you're on the public cloud, or for we can just say which is using a global service. For example, IAM. IAM is a service which is globally available. That's not sovereign, and in that case, if the user ID is not working on your credential and not working, you will see an impact. Even if your software is working and you're not able to log in, again, that's a failure. So I think all these services need to be region bound in some case, and that should be region bound in terms of a dedicated infrastructure and not just purely like a scope bound for that government, right? So even though governments are creating sovereign cloud for their own control and that kind of a reason, the whole reason of it should not be there. It should also be available limit in a limited way to business critical organizations, for example, banks, as I mentioned. So your banks in your country should be able to access that infrastructure in case of a disaster. So your critical systems don't go down.
Mm. So, going back to something what you just said, which is very important, looking at sovereignty on that aspect, I'm going to ask you, what are the structural characteristics of the global cloud ecosystem which reinforce dependency on a few dominant providers?
There are a lot of factors, but I think the highest factors that reinforce lock-ins, if you mean that, would be, for example, I think the highest factor is cost, because
Mm.
when things get cheaper, we get greedy. So and we all like to save money. So we go
Mm.
for the cheapest available service provider that saves us money. Second thing is obviously the data transfer, right? When it comes to data transfer, you would like to have higher speeds. You like to have lowest latencies available. It is very important when it comes to critical services. So latency is one of the factors, and that's why we are trying to host our cloud architectures in our closest availability zone. But we sometimes forget to see what kind of capacity it has. For example, I'm based in India in Pune, right? And I would love to choose my closest location, which is Mumbai in AWS, let's say. But I cannot completely rely on that if I'm running a critical service. I should try to find another DR architecture, let's say somewhere in Europe, so that, if something goes wrong with the entire internet in India, I still have a critical architecture that I can use in that scenario. So storage, network cost is there, and obviously we have some proprietary services. For example, now when we are talking about AI, right? AWS Bedrock is my go-to solution in a lot of different things. So that would make me more biased to go to AWS because we have Bedrock, we have the new solution which is the Amazon Q, which helps with the vibe coding. So I know that even though Microsoft Azure has equivalent solutions, but it is something that is not like an ecosystem which AWS already has, and they have an advantage over that. So proprietary services would also be a factor for me to choose for me to choose a vendor.
Mm. Wow, thank you for that. And since we really have a shy audience today, I think this is the first time we haven't gotten any questions. Maybe they're bedazzled by your expertise, Naval. I'm going to look at it like that. So my last question before we end this session is, if you could recommend one resilience priority every organization should implement in 2026, what would that be?
I think resilience strategy that I would recommend is, and I always do that, is split think about your most critical workloads that would cost you your reputation, right?
Mhm.
And once you factor in those kind of factors, especially when it comes about reputation in terms of user experience, because I keep user experience on top of my product. If users are not happy, if nobody is using my product, then I don't exist in the industry. So I think for that to happen, your most critical workloads, in my opinion, should be multi-cloud. Some people think, and I know that I'm talking about cost, very high cost in this scenario, but what should happen is if you have an architecture in one vendor with one vendor, that should have a replica, maybe not an active replica, maybe it could be active passive, but you should have a same replica with a different vendor, or preferably in your own private data center. So in that scenario, especially for critical organizations like banks, hospitals, transportation, airlines, these are all critical. So in this scenario, you should have a critical infrastructure of your own and don't completely rely on public cloud or just vendor. Because every organizations I know they still have some presence on the physical data centers.
Hmm. So looks like we have a question from Rupali. Rupali's asking for customers, what redundancy strategies do you recommend to avoid total downtime from provider outages?
I think it's the same answer that I just gave. And I will be very honest,
Hmm.
Rupali, it's not possible to avoid a total downtime because what we saw with Cloudflare and AWS, the AWS issue could be avoided if you're in a different continent or if you're in a different cloud region, right? Because most permanently, if affected, it affected the Americas and somewhere in Africa and in some parts of Europe. It was just that predominant. But when you talk about Cloudflare outage, you cannot dodge it because DNS is down. You cannot even log into your systems. So it happens. And also in case of serious issues, for example, let's say if the vendor is doing an upgrade and, as I gave an example, the IAM is down, you cannot avoid that. But you should just divide your critical infrastructure into two parts and, split it among, different multi-cloud vendors or preferably on a private cloud. That is the only known solution so far. But obviously you need to add added layer of FinOps over that. So at least you have a team of cloud FinOps experts who can analyze what kind of you are going to costs are going to incur on this kind of an architecture, and how you can load on the cost. Because the most rejections that you're going to see from your leadership when you're trying to suggest a more resilient architecture is cost. Nobody wants to pay something on a passive architecture. Even I wouldn't like to do that. But if I know it's a necessity, it's a need of the business, and you need that to exist. So for that kind of existence, you need to pay. It's like your bunker, in case of a war scenario. And in the modern times, a cloud outage is like a modern IT war scenario, right? You need to get into a war room, and you need to think about a strategy how to get your product back online. So in this scenario, we need to think about investing that. So I think you need to discuss this with your architecture team. I think it should be a joint discussion within the architecture team, the finance team, in some scenarios, your CFO or the CXOs. And you need to think about whether you want to pay that money and what is the cheapest available option, or not cheapest, what is the most optimized available option for you to create that architecture.
Thank you so much. And with that last question, we are going to wrap up. And just this has been an incredibly enlightening discussion. A big thank you to our amazing guests for sharing their expertise. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, we weren't able to explore every aspect of the topic. However, the depth and quality of today's discussion was remarkable. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you, and to everyone who joined us today. Remember, you can stay connected with Zero Day Dispatch through our website, newsletter, our LinkedIn page, Slack, and other social media platforms, all of which I've added to our chat. And we really look forward to continuing these crucial conversations. Until next time, and thank you everyone so much.
Thank you, everyone.